Hey, today on episode 479 of the I Am Salt Lake podcast, we chat with Michael Aguilar and Naomi Watkins from This Is Her Place podcast. We get to find out the story of This Is Her Place podcast and what motivated them to start a podcast all about all the awesome women here in Utah. What a great conversation. We're going to get into that here in just a moment.
Yeah, I really love talking to these guys. They are extra special, and this is such a cool project. I'm excited to share it. But before we get into that, I think we should introduce ourselves. A good sir.
I think, yeah.
I'm Chrissy Hollifield.
Hey, I'm Chris Hollifield.
And we are your hosts of the show. If you're a long-time listener of this podcast, welcome back and thank you for joining us again. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, you might be wondering what it's all about. Well, we're here every week with a brand new episode where we like to showcase awesome people in Salt Lake City and surrounding areas. We get to talk to business owners, authors, tattoo artists, restaurant owners, breweries, distilleries, food truck owners, podcasters, really anyone that might have a cool story to share.
All right. Like I said at the very beginning, on this episode, we chat with Michael Aguilar and Naomi Watkins. We get to talk about their podcast, This Is Her Place podcast. Oh my gosh, I love talking to other podcasters on this podcast.
It's so fun because they're just as excited about it as us.
Yeah, and then every time I'm just like, what a great idea. Like this podcast all about all the awesome people here in Utah.
Yeah, the spin on it, the angle they take is amazing.
Yeah, so anyway, like I said, This Is Her Place podcast. This is a good one, you guys, so let's get into it. How did the two of you meet? So if you guys just met really for the first time today, how did you meet to start the podcast? Like, how did that start for the two of you? Let's start right there, if you don't mind.
Yeah, the podcast actually started before Mike.
Okay.
So there was another co-host prior to Mike for our what we're calling our first season.
It was like the test round season.
Yeah, well,
I just kidding.
Yeah, trying to figure out what the heck we're doing. And during a pandemic, what does this look like? Like figuring out our voices and how the format of the show. And then that co-host moved on to something else. And so we actually put out a call, like a job posting, and mutual friends of ours recommended that Mike should apply. And he was our top pick. So we're really glad that he said yes.
And it's been really fun.
Mike, I was listening to, I think it might have been the first episode you were on. I don't know. But you made me literally laugh out loud when I was driving. I was like, oh my gosh, that was so funny. And I just had to tell you how much I appreciated your humor into it. You're very clever.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. That's nice of you to say. Thank you. And it's been fun. But I have to say, I think for me, not only has it been like a real privilege to get to work with Naomi and kind of tell these stories, but Naomi's really smart. She has a PhD, so it's fun to she knows her stuff when it comes to women and women's history, but so does the founder of This Is Her Place, Patrick. I don't know. Naomi, can you talk about how the podcast even started, at all?
Sure, yeah. So I was working as the director of education for a nonprofit called Better Days 2020, which was all created to do events and public awareness and education around the women's suffrage anniversaries that were in 2020. So it was the 100th anniversary of some women getting to vote with the 19th Amendment. But a lot of people didn't know that Utah women were voting 50 years prior to that national amendment. And I definitely didn't know that, being a transplant to Utah. So Patrick Mason, who is a professor of history at Utah State, had this idea of doing a podcast about women from Utah in the past. And he approached me, given the work that I had been doing. And I said to him, we can do a podcast about women in the past, but I think it would be really cool, a different twist to then connect those women from the past to contemporary women, because just like we don't know women from the past, we don't know women who are doing really cool work now either. It's I think, across the board. And there's really interesting synergies and connections between the past and the present. I mean, unfortunately, we're still working on a lot of, or most of the same issues that we were working on in the past. And I think having that connection between past and present just yields a richer and more interesting conversation.
I agree so hard. I'm actually a huge history nerd, not official, so I can't tell you actual things, but I love learning about it. And I was listening to the episode, a few of your episodes. The one about the police officer, Rosie Rodriguez, I think it was the very first episode.
Rosie Rivera.
Rosie Rivera. I'm so sorry. My apologies.
She's the first. Oh, no, you're good. I think she's the first sheriff, female sheriff. Is that in Oh, I don't
think so.
Her first female county sheriff.
Yeah. And how you tied the story of, I can't remember the other lady's name. I should have written it down.
Claire Ferguson.
Nice. Excellent. It was really, really cool how you could kind of simultaneously tell their stories, but and see the connection. It made it feel so much more human. It made the history side of it feel so much more human. And it's a really clever spin on it that I am really grateful that you thought of.
Well, if you think about it, sometimes I think a lot of us, at least for me, are kind of triggered by this like notion of we're going to learn history. And I think that's just because you're like, no, I already finished high school. Like, why do I have to do this again? So I think by connecting history with contemporary figures, it makes that digestion of historical fact much more, I don't know. I don't want to say much more interesting because history is interesting, but it makes it a little bit easier, I think.
It's not like a list of dates and facts. It's a story.
Yeah, right, exactly. You know, Governor Olene Walker was the first female governor of the state of Utah. And that, you know, she was alive during my time. So it wasn't like she is a historical figure from decades ago. But the current lieutenant governor, Deidre Henderson, is alive. And it's fun because she interacts with people and myself on Twitter. So it's nice because I've learned history. I've learned about Governor Walker while also living in history with Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, who's like a real person who's relatable and interacts with us. So yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, she seems very clever. I haven't gotten through that episode, but that's a good episode for everyone to listen to. I like how she's just owning herself.
Was Patrick just not interested in doing any of the hosting on the podcast, or what's his involvement with the podcast now? Or was it just kind of an idea he had and that was the only involvement he has?
It was his idea. And originally, and he's, I guess, our money guy, right? He's the executive producer. He finds money to make the whole thing run, applies for grants, does that kind of aspect with the podcast, which is an important piece.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And since we're all doing this as a side gig to our regular day jobs, it's nice that we each have our own designated role. And when Patrick came to me, he also was like, well, do you want to co-host? Do you not want to co-host? And I was pretty adamant that I wanted a male co-host, which I think surprised Patrick a lot. And my reasoning being that a lot of times women's history gets seen as a women's thing. Like, it's only women who like to think and talk about women, which I don't think is true. I think, you know, women are people and people have interesting stories. And so I also wanted someone who had a different perspective than me. Like, Mike has never been a woman, right? Like, at least I don't think so.
Unless there's something you have to tell us.
Nope, never.
Right.
All right.
So it's nice having someone who has a very different perspective, too, to like learn about and share these stories and to be interested in them. I mean, I think Mike models that really well. He's so enthusiastic about learning about these different women and sharing their stories.
I love how your brain can think outside the box and really appreciate bringing in things that people wouldn't think of like that, like getting opposite perspectives or different perspectives. It's really unusual for someone to think that way. It's really a cool plan.
Well, thank you.
Well, and I was going to say, when they reached out to me when our mutual friend reached out to me about this opportunity, I was really curious. I was like, why do they, to Naomi's point, I think Patrick was a little bit shocked and I was too. It's like, well, why would they want a man to be participating in this? And that's not to say that I'm not interested. A lot of my community work as it stands is in women's rights, women's reproductive rights, women's advocacy. So it's a perfectly aligned, but that's stuff that I get to do behind the scenes. And initially I was like, well, it would seem that they would want a woman to be the face of this podcast. And then I got to learn a little bit more about Naomi's logic. And it's true. Women's history or history in general isn't just one gender's history. It's all of our history. And so it's been really neat to be kind of one of two voices of our history. It doesn't have to be gendered.
I don't think we covered this. This is the first podcast that either one of you have ever done, correct? Or have you done another podcast before?
No.
Yeah.
What made you think to go podcast?
I didn't. I mean, it was Patrick. He was like, yeah, Patrick came and it sounded like a fun thing to learn, right? Like, I mean, I've written curriculum, I've written a kid's book, you know, I've had all these other mediums of sharing this history. So it sounded like a fun challenge. But we do have people who, you know, like our producer, well, I don't know, what is he called now? Anyway, the person who like edits everything and makes us sound really good.
Our sound engineer, the sound engineer.
Thank you.
So neither one of you have to edit either. You guys don't have to edit it. Okay.
No. We have a team of 6 people. 6 total people.
Lucky.
I'm sorry.
No, I
not
think
rubbing
that's
that
great.
in. Sorry.
No. It's awesome.
It's a lot of work just doing this part. Like I can imagine, I'm sure this is like a full-time plus hours gig for both of you.
Podcasting can get a lot of time. That's kind of why I was curious, like, especially the style of podcast. This is her place, which, I mean, we didn't even really fully, I mean, Chrissy and I will add an introduction to it and all of that, obviously, and properly introduce the show to let you guys know. But I mean, this is a very well done podcast. When I turned it on, I mean, I didn't know what to expect, right? Like I was like, okay, I want to check this show out. But then I was like, wow, this is very well done, very well produced, very
NPR.
Well put together. And so I was like, there's got to be a team putting this thing together. I mean, that's a lot of work.
I'm going to share that with the team. I love that you said very NPR. And I think, Naomi, you were going to talk about Des, right? And like,
so our producer is Allison Pond, and she has experience doing long form news at the Deseret News and other news agencies. And so from the get-go, we really wanted to make sure that the podcast focused on storytelling. And so, yeah, it's a scripted podcast. We interview people, but then we have to transcribe all those interviews and then write a script, which then Mike and I then narrate and then have our little impromptu conversations in between segments. But it is a lot of legwork, you know. It's not just doing an interview and putting it up, which is what a lot of podcasts are. Yours is not that way either. But you know what I mean? Like to your point, Chris, podcasting is definitely exploded. There's a lot to listen to. And so we really, I think we're really blessed to have people on the team who all have their different strengths and niches and really make it happen.
Well, and that's one of the big things I like to emphasize is how much work these podcasts take. I mean, how long does it take for an episode to be put together? I mean, what's the process like? I mean, I guess we don't have to get into all of it, but there's a lot of back and forth. It's not like this episode will probably be up next week. So, I mean, that's a pretty quick turnaround, right? Like you guys probably have...
There's a lot to coordinate.
You know, you record your seasons and you put it together and you coordinate and you have this recording and that recording.
You have the added element of having to research. You know, you interview and research, which are actually like typically 2 different types of podcasts. So you're kind of doing the work of 2 different types of podcasts into one episode. And so it's kind of double work on top of all of that. It really
you're
is
very
a lot.
right, Chrissy. Well, and that's why I have to give kudos to both of you. The interviewing is a very different job than the researching for the interview, but then the transcribing and then pulling all of those, the transcription together through like a narrative to create a story. It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of work. But I would say to your initial question, Chris, what brought me to what compelled me to do this? I don't know. During the pandemic, I have to be honest, I found myself at night just bored and not really feeling fulfilled. I do a lot of charity work normally, but this year there's just no opportunities to volunteer because you can't be around other humans. And so when this opportunity came up, knowing that I could do it virtually, even though it's a lot of hard work and it's wearing different hats at different times, it certainly became worth it because you know how certain things motivate you as a human, being able to do stuff after my 9-to-5 job. That's one of the things that motivates me. And it's really fun. And it's fun to work with Naomi.
That's so cool. Yeah. It's your creative outlet. It recharges you.
Yeah, exactly. Creative outlet.
Awesome.
That's everybody needs one of those.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to take just a minute now and tell you about one of our awesome sponsors, I love talking about them. You love hearing about them. UtahMarijuana.org. Hey, they are your number one spot for all things medical marijuana, medical cannabis, CBD, and THC. I want to give a shout out to Tim Pickett. You guys might remember him from episode 420 on this podcast, where we got to talk about medical marijuana here in Utah. Such a great episode. Well, now their team of medical cannabis experts, they're going to make getting your medical card super easy, from your first office visit to navigating the state card application and beyond.
And with over 20 compassionate and highly skilled qualified medical providers ready to help you find relief, you won't have to search for a doctor willing to recommend cannabis treatment. The patient experience team at UtahMarijuana.org is dedicated to helping you get all the way through the process so you can get your medicine legally. And I just have to say, I am really happy to be a patient of theirs, because they helped me re-up.
Oh yeah, renew
my card.
Super
I
easy
have
to
phone
do it
anxiety,
with them. Yeah.
and so they kept calling me, and I kept getting scared to pick up the phone. Never picked it up. They left a lot of messages, helped me walk through it, but they were so awesome. Even though I just wasn't feeling it, but they kept me going.
No, they make it super easy, and
They really do.
like Chrissy mentioned, use the code GREEN25. You're going to get $25 off your first visit. And then that way they know you came from this podcast. And if you're in North Salt Lake or Bountiful area, check this out, UtahMarijuana.org. They have a location right next door to Wholesome Co. up there, right by Costco. The address is 580 West, 100 North, number 4 in Bountiful. So depending on where you are located in the valley, they have a location just for you. So isn't it time that you took control of your own health? UtahMarijuana.org. Feel better. How far do you plan on taking this podcast? Like, is it only planned for a few seasons? Is it planned to kind of go as long as you both want, just go and go and go until you get burned out? I mean, is there a game plan here or anything?
I think that one of my favorite quotes of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, former Supreme Court Justice, was, "When there are 9, when will there be enough Supreme Court justices that are women serving on the bench? When there are 9. I would love to be able to tell every story of every remarkable Utah woman. So I guess my answer to that would be like, when there are 9, when we've had the opportunity to share everybody's story, right?
You're
Naomi?
going down with the ship, man. You're going to be on your
Hell yeah.
deathbed.
So, I mean, and
one
that-
more story.
Basically, I'm just trying to say I want a job, or I want this side hustle for a really long time. I want to work on this project for a while, because it brings, I just think that there are a lot of really cool stories, and I don't think that we have any sort of end date in mind. I think the hope is that we will get people to listen. People will enjoy our content. People will learn something about both women from history and contemporary society. And if that happens, then we can continue to tell stories. What do you think, Naomi?
The first season was we're just going to see what happens. We're going to create something together, figure out the format. And I don't think Patrick had thought past season 1 necessarily, right? Because if we don't get more money to do another season, then it's over. So, but I think now we've with Mike on board, we've really found our groove, figured out our formatting well. And so now it's it's really hard to choose which women to feature, right? Because we can't, Mike wants to feature everybody, but in reality, we really can't. We have to be selective.
It's so hard
really
to find.
Challenge accepted. Challenge accepted.
How do you have a process to pick the women that you're bringing on now? Or is it just kind of, is there kind of a list, or how are you choosing the women that you're bringing on now then?
I think it's sort of a group effort, but I would say that Naomi leads that with kind of the creative team. I think that Naomi, out of all of us, with Patrick, kind of has the greatest understanding of women's history. So she kind of spearheads that. I think she doesn't give herself enough credit for it.
Well, I'm not a historian, but I think too, a lot of it comes to what's happening in the world around us. So with season 1, we started the podcast, in the early days of the pandemic. So it was it makes sense to include Angela Dunn, our state epidemiologist, and then to look at public health workers in the past. With Rosie Rivera and Claire Ferguson, we actually wrote that entire episode before the murder of George Floyd. And then that happened. And obviously things really became center stage about police brutality and racial tensions and So we actually re-scripted the whole episode we wrote it after the George Floyd murder, just because there were different themes that we felt needed to be, brought to the forefront. And so, like, with this season, it made sense to include Deidre Henderson, or, like Mike was saying, our latest lieutenant governor. It was timely. But sometimes it's just, you know what, this is a fun story. And we pitch stories to each other about different women. And, through that pitch effort and our talking about it, different people's stories rise to the top, right? And that's where we go.
The one thing that we really try to do, though, is make sure that we're representing women from all backgrounds, all cultural backgrounds, from every corner of the state of Utah. Naomi and I are lucky to call Salt Lake City our home. We kind of we live in the capital, and we kind of bring these stories to the capital, and we get to tell them. So through that process of identifying, I think one of the things, or one of the lenses that we use, is truly how do we make sure that we're telling diverse stories as well, not just kind of one person's story.
Have you guys thought about doing other podcasts already? And the fact that this is the first podcast you did. I remember when I started podcasting, all of a sudden I got all these ideas now, right? I'm like, okay, I want to do a podcast about this. I want to do a podcast about this. So now that you both have your feet wet with podcasting, maybe you want to venture out and do your own show, right?
Are you addicted yet?
I made a joke earlier.
He pitched one to me today. So we're doing an episode about a restaurant episode, and featuring the founder of Red Iguana.
Nice.
What's her name again, Mike?
Maria Cardenas is the founder, and then her daughter, Lucy Cardenas, and her partner, the current owners. So
Mike and I went to the Red Iguana today. We both have our shots. We went to the patio, met in person for the very first time. And we sit down and Mike's like, I have an idea. So you should share it.
And as I was driving, because I haven't been out. I haven't been out in the world. I haven't had the opportunity to meet Naomi in person yet. I mean, we've been doing this for 5-6 months now. And today was the first time that we had the opportunity to meet in person.
That's wild.
But we've both tried to stay really safe. And so, yeah, we've got our shots and we meet. And on my way, I was like, oh my gosh, I get to hang out with a human being in person in a restaurant. And so I was like, it'd be fun if we started a spin-off podcast about where Naomi and I just go to restaurants, specifically women-owned restaurants, and we eat on Sundays on their patio, and we just eat and we tell our story of us eating.
You know what?
I don't think people would really
listen
care.
To that.
But
no, YouTube spin-off, YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah.
I've decided. You have to do it now. Okay?
Yeah.
Good.
Chrissy has decided.
Look, I want to watch you guys eat at some wonderful woman-owned restaurants.
Right? And there are some really cool ones, I have to say.
Oh, yeah.
Naomi mentioned the state epidemiologist, Dr. Angela Dunn. I kind of just want to go back to that really quick because that story on the first season morphed into, it was really neat. But one of the stories that was told there was the story of Martha Hughes Cannon. And for me, and for people listening, I'm learning about these really cool women as I'm doing this. Martha Hughes Cannon is going to be one of, Naomi, is it one of 13 once the 4 that are pending statues? One of 14 of 100 statues in the Capitol Rotunda in the statuary hall, right?
Those are a lot of big
words. Not statutory. Not statutory hall.
Sounds good to me.
Basically, Martha Hughes Cannon's our first female state senator, and we currently have 2 men statues in the state capitol back in DC. This year, or coming up when the pandemic is over, Martha Hughes Cannon will be the first woman from Utah to be represented in the state or in the Capitol Statuary Hall, which is pretty cool because there's only 9 others there, and I think there are 4 in the making. So of the 100, because each state gets to have 2 statues represented in Washington, D.C., and of the 100, currently only 9 are women, and I think they're slated to be 14, which is, I think, the math I was trying to do in my head just a second ago. Is that right?
Still really lousy.
Oh, if you say numbers, I ignore that, and I listen to everything else. So your math sounds accurate to me.
You could have just said, there's a lot of men.
There's a lot of dudes.
A lot of dudes at National Statuary Hall. And Martha Hughes Cannon will be there.
Which is cool. I think that's so cool to be the state, sending one of the first, right? Mm-hmm. One of the first women. I think that's really awesome.
Cool. When I did go to Minnesota, we were talking a little bit earlier before we started recording. And I was in Minnesota with my parents, and I'm like, man, people still live this way. It's really cool. I felt like I got in a time machine and went back in time. And he's like, Utah's actually really progressive. And he was telling me, because my dad travels, and he's like, Utah, you would be surprised how progressive Utah actually is. Because that's not what we're thought of. And so
we need to change
proof
that.
is in the statue, right?
Well, the statue was a fight. The statue was a fight, though. So
why was it a fight? Like, why was it?
It
a fight,
was
though?
because, well, so the two statues that are there currently, one is Brigham Young, which, I mean, I don't know, not going to touch that guy. And then Philo Farnsworth, the inventor of the television, is the other one. And so Martha will be replacing Philo. And I mean, I would have thought it would be like a shoo-in, like this will be easy. But there are a lot of Philo fans and a lot of like sexist arguments, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, but Philo's contributions are bigger than Martha's contributions. And we don't need a statue to make us feel better about ourselves. This is a man speaking, of course, where all the statues are of you. Or, like
the TV is the center of the nuclear family. You're destroying the family.
Yes.
I'm dying. Yes, 100%. That probably was the argument.
No, I mean, it's true. Yeah. And, and then there was the argument, too, that because Martha Hughes Cannon was a polygamous wife, like, oh, we can't send a polygamist to Washington. And it's like, well, Brigham Young is there. And he was like, I joke, the grand poobah of polygamy. So if you're going to get mad about sending Martha there, then you should also apply that argument to Brigham Young. But of course,
back up.
Right. Like, why is there a different standard there?
Yeah. Yeah. And there always is, like, in society. It's really sad. It is ingrained in us. And it's even ingrained in women. We automatically kind of think a little bit more sexist, and we have to kind of talk to ourselves and be like, wait, why am I thinking that way? Why would I, at least our generation, I think.
Yeah, we're swimming in it for sure.
Wasn't Philo that guy from UHF? That guy with the chemist guy? Wasn't that Philo? Wasn't that his name?
The one
Philo?
who turns into an alien at the end?
I think. Anyway.
I love that that's where you went.
Hey,
I love that.
Good movie. It's a good
oh,
movie.
man. So tell me about this book that you wrote, Naomi. You've just written the one book, or have you written multiple books? The Champions of Change, 25 Women Who Made History? Is that, that's the book? I mean, what's the inspiration behind that book?
It's from my work with Better Days 2020. So, being in education, being the director of education, I had to think about, like, how do I get kids to know about these women, right? And make them household names. I don't know. I find looking at black and white photos with women with tight buns and stern expressions to be really boring. And they all look the same to me. Like, there's nothing distinguishing about them. And so I came up with this idea, like, we really need illustrations of these women, and those illustrations need to tell a story. So that's how we found illustrator Brooke Smart, who is phenomenal. She really makes the project. And so we worked with Brooke, and actually she illustrated 50 Utah women. The book, Champions of Change, 25 Women Who Made History, is 25 of those 50. So that's really where the book comes from. It's nice to have it in a book form because it's more permanent rather than, illustrations online or in cards. But that represents a lot of research, right? We had to locate the women. We went to a lot of different communities and asked them, who is a woman that you would pick that really made a difference in your community? Each of the officially recognized tribes in Utah selected a woman to be in the project. So it's work that I'm really proud of and really a collaborative effort.
It looks really
That is
cool.
so cool.
It looks really cool. I'm going to put a link for it at iamsaltlake.com with this episode, so people can, at least kind of check out the cover. It's a cool cover, and I mean, what it's about, and then hopefully order it. But you could probably get it from some of the bookstores here locally in Salt Lake, or do you know of any bookstores? Probably at King's or something like that.
King's English has it, and I've seen it. What is that the coffee tea place in Park City? Alchemy?
It'll come back to me. It's not Alchemy. It's not. It'll come to me.
I've seen it at local bookstores.
Okay,
yes.
Very cool.
Right on.
Well, that's a perfect transition to, we have some standard Salt Lake City area questions. Let's kind of venture into that we like to ask people that come on the podcast. And so we're going to ask both of you. We have family and friends that come to visit the area, and they say, hey, show us around. we kind of have these little tours we take people on, I'm sure. I mean, I know I have my favorite places. So what are some of your favorite places that you like to show off in Utah? And when I say Salt Lake, I say the mountains or, the Great Salt Lake or hiking trails. I don't know if you have any favorite things you both like to show off a little bit.
So I love when people come to Salt Lake. I tell people when I leave Utah, when I leave Salt Lake City and specifically Salt Lake City, for vacation, I can't wait to come home because I think that we have created the most amazing kind of like cultural, space to like live in, work in, exist in. So when people come here, I get so excited about driving them around downtown, pointing out all of the major landmarks, including the capital of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, driving them right by the temple to show them that like this worldwide church, this worldwide institution, whether you believe in it, whether you don't believe in it, is right here in Salt Lake City. We always end up at a staple restaurant in Utah. Naomi and I were at the Red Iguana today because we're working on a podcast episode on women-owned restaurants in Salt Lake City. So we were at the Red Iguana, which is women-owned, women co-founded, women co-owned.
And delicious, I might add.
And delicious. So, okay, side note, fun fact, go all the time, but especially go on holidays because they have a different like special menu on the holidays. I had the filet mignon today and it was incredible and it's only on special days.
Oh man, that is good to know. Insider tip. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
I took several bites of Mike's dish. It was good.
It was so good. It was so good.
I love it. I love that the first time you guys met, you shared food. That's a co-host right there.
And aggressively shared food too. We're like chips, salsa chips. We always include a restaurant staple, and there are so many. Saffron Valley, which is also woman owned. There's always a food element, right? And then I love one of my favorite places to kind of end the tour of Salt Lake City is in the avenues up on 11th. There's a park there, and the park overlooks the valley looking south. And one of my favorite things to do is to throw down a blanket in the summer in that park and kind of just like look at Salt Lake City in all her glory from that space. So that is, if someone were to come to Salt Lake City, architecture, going up and down, showing them the grid, showing them how the grid works. I don't know why people think it's confusing, but show them how the grid works.
It's easy.
Taking them. It is. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Like it's just.
I got it after about 20 years. Come on. Get it together, everyone else.
Showing them our neighborhoods, eating really good food, specifically good food from women-owned restaurants, and then ending the night stargazing in the avenues. And that's where Naomi lives. I need to pick up Naomi on my way up to the park in the avenues.
And I'm like, which park is this? It's like by my house.
Yeah, literally it is.
So, I'm a transplant to Salt Lake originally from California, and I traded the beach for mountains. I love how accessible the mountains are. I mean, I live in the avenues. I live right by Memory Grove. I think that is a fantastic place to take people. But I really just love that drive up Big Cottonwood Canyon and ending at Silver Lake and wandering around, and you're likely to see a moose. Or taking that trail up to Willow Lake, Big Cottonwood Canyon. That's like my favorite because it's only a mile through this like beautiful aspen grove. And you get to this spectacular lake where you have a view of the whole canyon, and then moose often come and visit at the lake. I mean, to take people who don't live around nature to be like, we just literally hiked a mile and we're in a totally different world with this spectacular scenery. Yeah, I'm ready for summer. Can you tell?
Oh, for real. Oh, the sun is finally showing its face.
I am so ready for this year. Last year, I just, got to get past last year. Now, Naomi, you mentioned you're from California. We didn't talk about where home is. Now, Mike, did you grow up here in Utah, or where are you from?
I am from Utah. So I grew up here, was raised here. My father, though, is from Mexico. He moved here when he was a teenager, and he met my mom. They met at a young age, had me. I'm here, and I love it. I love Utah. And I moved to Salt Lake about 10 years ago, and I wouldn't go anywhere else. Utah's beautiful. when I talk about traveling to other places, I'm actually talking about traveling back home for holiday functions, not in Salt Lake City, and like getting excited to come back to Salt Lake City because I love it.
It's so true. When you leave and come back, you're like, whoa, this place is really majestic.
Yeah.
Like, what? It
is. It really is.
It's a cool place.
Yesterday, we went up to visit a family member who's looking to buy a new house. It was an hour away. And when we came back in, this is funny. We got off of 4th South coming into the city, the kind of the gateway into Salt Lake City. And it was at that moment where I kind of like let out a breath of, to be a gay man in Utah, there are very few places where you like always feel super safe and comfortable. Right. And even though I was with family an hour north, still, like in those spaces, it's not always the most comfortable place to be. So coming off of 4th South, coming over the viaduct and like into the city, and you see the kind of like the landscape, it's like, I told my partner, I was like, pressure right there. Like, it's nice to be home. It's nice to be home where I can feel like, I'm safe.
Just full on comfortable.
These are my people. Yeah.
Yeah. That's rad.
Where in California are you from, Naomi?
I grew up in the San Diego area, so Carlsbad specifically. Yeah.
Okay, just always curious. I grew up in Ventura, so I always have to.
So yeah, close. I lived in Pasadena.
Okay.
So as an adult.
Very cool.
Close.
Very cool. Now back to Salt Lake City. Is there anything either one of you would change about Salt Lake City if you had the opportunity? And if not, that's completely fine too. We've had people that said, "Hey, you know what? I love it the way it is."
If you were a genie in a bottle, like let's really think outside the box.
I would stop tearing down our historical buildings and building very ugly, large apartment buildings.
Okay, I like that.
I love that answer.
No,
Yes.
I agree. Actually, the issue is affordable housing and the fact that and I don't even think, certainly we should not be tearing down historical buildings, but even 4th South going all the way up to the U has just turned into this kind of cookie cutter 6-story building like alleyway. And but I get it. I get why we're doing it, right? Affordable housing in Salt Lake City is not.
It's not affordable though.
It
well,
really
true.
isn't. It's super expensive.
It's not affordable.
But a portion of it,
it's
like
ugly and expensive.
One of the reasons why the city is kind of granting a portion of it is affordable or is meant to be affordable housing. I don't know. I think we have an issue here with the services we provide to our homeless population or individuals experiencing homelessness. And that breaks my heart. And I think that I was downtown yesterday around where the road home was, and it's now gone. And I recognize, why. But it's just there are camps, encampments there. And I think if there's one thing I could change about Salt Lake City, it would be to figure out this housing crisis and to figure out how to best home individuals experiencing homelessness. That would be the thing.
Yeah,
do you have any answers, any thoughts? Because I have none. I don't know what they would be, but I was just curious if you had any.
Yeah, I have a few. One of which is I think that the state at large puts a lot of pressure on Salt Lake City to handle the crisis. And I think that there are other cities and townships who have kind of absolved themselves of their fair share of the problem, and it makes sense for people to come into Salt Lake City because this is where all the resources are. But I do think that leaning on each other as like communities beyond even Salt Lake City would really go a long way in my opinion. So yeah, that's the, we need to come together, but housing is an issue.
Housing is a big issue. And if it gets too expensive, how's anybody going to be able to have a house to live in, really?
Right.
Even with the
that's
pandemic.
The biggest concern.
Yeah. Anyway,
Being
that
an
was my
adult
soapbox.
is the worst. You know way too much stuff.
I know, right?
Let's talk about how our listeners can connect with you, the both of you, the podcast, and, how they can obviously listen, probably in places that they're listening to this podcast. But I'll let you, which one of you wants to talk about all that, like how people can connect and whatnot?
So we have a website, thisisherplace.org. So, you can listen to the episodes there, find a lot, like the transcripts of all the episodes, source materials, photos of the women, which I think are cool to see. But then, of course, you can listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. So you can just go from this podcast to our podcast.
Yeah, right there, right wherever.
It's great like that.
It's a great sister podcast.
That's the beautiful thing about podcasts intermingling is because you're like, well, you already found this one, right? You already found I Am Salt Lake, so you know where to go. So just go type in This Is Her Place, boom, hit subscribe, you're golden.
And I love seeing it. I love seeing the different podcasts that take a unique perspective on Salt Lake, and just like you guys, where we're all lifting each other up and sharing stories. And it's really neat because they're all shared in a unique way. So we all get to share our voice, and hopefully, we'll be there to resonate with lots of different types of people. Absolutely.
And I do love to, one of the things that I love about the I Am Salt Lake podcast, actually my partner Kelly was the one who introduced me to the podcast. I think I told you that before.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, he loves the podcast, and now so do I. I love how close it is to you two as hosts. And I think if there was one thing I actually took from the I Am Salt Lake podcast, is that I want to be close as well. So, and by that I mean, if you were to engage with either myself or Naomi on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, we're going to engage with you too. I think that's the thing about news and any form of media. It feels kind of like us and them-y a little bit.
It's very disconnected.
It is, yeah. And I think that what you're trying to do, and one of my takeaways, and I actually called Chris when I first started this. I wanted to ask, okay, I've never been on a podcast before. I have no idea how to do any of this. And one of the things that I really am hoping not only to do now, but to do forever, is to be kind of approachable in that, like, I interact kind of way. So I hope, to your question, how do people get involved? Tweet us, interact with us, because we'll interact right back.
And I'll put all those links again at iamsaltlake.com with this episode. And what you were going to say something there, Naomi.
I was going to say, like, we also are always looking for interesting women to feature. So, I mean, this season we're telling the story of Josie Bassett, which was a listener nominated suggestion. So, I mean, back to your question about too, like, how do we pick people? We don't know all the stories, and we're always looking for interesting women to feature so people can nominate or submit, submit a woman for us to consider.
You guys, do you know Connell O'Donovan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like he would have some amazing ideas.
Again, remember going back to that one point around making sure that we are being incredibly inclusive when it comes to sharing stories of women of all cultural backgrounds. And I think one of the really neat things about Connell and the Utah Pride Center is that he has documented stories of queer women over history, which is, so yes, I totally agree.
So cool.
He
started a YouTube channel, and oh my gosh, I love his stuff. Yeah. I'm a fangirl.
Okay, I have a question for you, and I know I'm sorry, I'm not the host, but I'm just curious.
No, let's turn the mics down.
I just am curious, like, and not to put you on the spot, but do you have a favorite Utah historical or even contemporary woman that has impacted you or has impacted your way of life that you and I'm asking this because we're going to take it back and pitch it to the team so we can do an episode. Yeah, no, absolutely. I already think when I think I heard her voice though on one of your things, I think you already are doing something on Angela Brown, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, we are. Angela Brown is probably, Slug Magazine's been one of the biggest influential things probably in my Utah life. So.
Man, I would have to think about it. I have like too many like names going on in my head, and I really have to think about it. Well, Chrissy, I'm gonna solicit you to actually one day do an episode with us. So there's your warning. There you go. Oh well, I would love to be a co-host, like what is it called? A guest co-host. That would actually be kind of fun. That would be fun. We should do that. Fun. I don't like being talked to. I don't like. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. We'll make you feel really comfortable about telling your story. Okay. But I will say Angela Brown is an incredible human. I can't even she is awesome. She is awesome. Yeah. So really I'm excited to tell her story. And we tell some really so clever and so smart and funny and nice and pretty. Organized. Oh my gosh. That's true. We tell some really cool stories this season. Angela Brown is one of them. I think one that I'm really looking forward to is Lily Eskelsen Garcia. She was, I don't know if you know, but on the short list to be President Joe Biden's Secretary of Education. It was,
it was probably one of the coolest parts of my current co-host
It was
jobs.
Mike's first interview. He was very starstruck.
Well, this was in the vetting process. She told us how she had to run participating in this episode by Joe Biden's team. And they wanted to like double check, you know, who we were and like make sure we were legit and we weren't going to be some crazy, like, I don't know. Scandalous thing.
It's really hard to get political women in there because people assume you're out to get them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's very true. But the cool thing about her, though, was like, I'm going to do it. Doesn't matter who it is. This is who I am. If you have a problem with me, you probably haven't Googled my name before. And she's awesome. She eventually didn't get
badass.
Yeah, she is badass. She didn't get the job, but that's okay. She's going to go on to some really cool things. So we have a lot of really cool women. Who are you excited for, Naomi?
That's so hard to pick. I don't know. I like the episode that we're about to put out this week. Well, I guess once this airs, it'll be the week before that. But about ranching. Like, we're like city folk talking about ranching. But, I mean, it's such a big piece to the history of the state, right? The stories of people in the rural areas and ranching. It's a big component of that, where we get our food. But not just that, but also about the struggle and tussle about public lands and what do we do with them? I mean, these ranches, you know, were on native land and with native art and native structures. How do you protect them? How do you give access to them? And that comes up in this episode.
And how often are you releasing an episode?
About every 2 weeks.
About every 2 weeks you're releasing an episode. Awesome. I did. Because I don't think I asked that earlier, so I wasn't sure how many episodes were in the next season and so on and so forth, you know, like what we can look forward to. So every 2 weeks, subscribe and you're golden.
There really is a push and pull right now with, God, I'm so like, I just care a lot about certain things, but homelessness, public lands is another. So Bears Ears and the expansion of Bears Ears, right? But not to talk about that, Naomi's comment around how public lands are on native lands. And I was like, well, all of this is native land. Like actually the land that we're sitting on recording this episode is on native land. So
yeah.
And I think sometimes we forget that. What is the Ute tribe, or what's the tribe, Naomi, do you know, of that held the Salt Lake City land? Or what land are we on?
all eyes are on you, Naomi. She's like, no, get me out of here. Click. Internet disconnected.
Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Land. No, I'm just thinking about when you know when you could put your address into this website and it tells you the native land that you live on. And I believe, so I live in the Avenues, and that might be different wherever you are in the Valley, but I believe I live on Eastern Shoshone land.
What is that episode? Or that website? Do you know? I want to look. That's cool.
All these questions putting me on the spot.
Anyway, we're all on native land. We're all on native land. So.
That's the moral of the story.
Yeah.
The whole idea of this podcast, just to let you guys know we're on native land. Awesome.
but this is her place, right?
Yeah, this is her place.
This is her place.
Was there anything else? I mean, why the microphones are going here and they're hot? I mean, is there anything else? I mean, I know we kind of skimmed the surface with everything, but was there anything you were hoping we would talk about that we didn't get an opportunity to talk about before we wrap this episode up?
We could talk about the title of the podcast. I don't know if you guys caught the play on words there.
I hope we did.
Okay,
Is there another play on words besides her?
Well, I mean, so, you know, the story is, right, that Brigham Young and the Mormon pioneers came to the valley and he, like, stood on Ensign Peak and he declared, this is the place, right? And we have, like, this is the place park, state park, and all of that. I mean, it's, you know, I don't know if that's exactly what he said, but that's the legend.
Right, that's what's carried.
And so when thinking about, like, naming podcasts or anything is hard, right? Naming humans, naming books, like, all of it is just hard.
It's so true.
But, yeah, this is her place has so many different plays in that it's taking Brigham Young's words and claiming ownership, right? There's also the idea of, like, women have their place, like that, like, archaic idea. But I do think I do think it's a declaration, right? Like, this is her place. I declare this to be my place. particularly when Utah is not always thought of as a very progressive place, or isn't actually even a progressive place for women. So there you go. That's the
I
background.
love
cool.
that. Yeah,
I think it's a great name. I think you did well. I think whoever, you know.
You're not fired
That was my
today.
brainchild. So that was I will claim it. So
That's awesome.
Again, I was saying that Naomi doesn't take a lot of credit, but I think that Patrick kind of had the idea for the podcast, but Naomi really is the core for sure. She
You seem like the ideal lady.
is.
I like it.
well, and then Mike's the heart.
Am I? Oh, that's good to know. I should probably be nicer on social media. In that case.
It's a lot of pressure. Oh.
The only other thing that I would add is that I think there are a lot of stories of Utah women that need to be told, and sometimes that I don't think people want to hear because they don't subscribe to that woman's belief system or way of life. And I think that if anybody could just put that behind them and just kind of like enter into listening to this one of our episodes, any of our episodes with, today I'm going to learn a story of a woman who's shaped the world in our community, regardless of who they are or where they come from, whether I agree with them or whether I don't agree with them. If you can just like kind of have an open mind and go into one of the episodes, you're going to leave an episode feeling inspired by the women that we feature. So that's the last thing I would say.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with that.
That's why you're going to be on our show. That's why you're going to be on our show one day.
There you go, Chrissy.
We'll talk about that later.
Chrissy's like, we'll talk about that off air. Chrissy has a final question she asks everybody that comes through here, so I'm going to let her ask the both of you. Thank you again for doing the podcast with us, and best of luck with everything with the podcast. I mean, seriously, this is her place. It's awesome.
Yeah,
I'm
it's really
stoked for
cool.
her.
Thank you guys seriously so much for coming on. It was really, really fun. And there's a kitty. I see a kitty
That's
tail.
Matilda.
Oh.
This is Matilda's here. So
Oh,
Matilda.
She typically
Okay,
extends our recording sessions by 30 minutes because she's like causing a scene.
Because she's adorable.
Because
she like
she's
steps
adorable.
on things. Yeah.
I love them. Okay, sorry. I get distracted by cute things. Before we let you guys go and have a wonderful afternoon, can you leave us with a piece of advice or a life motto?
Like a life advice for listeners. Or,
leave our listeners with a piece of advice that you live by or you wish other people would live by.
I'll go first because this is something that really, one of the reasons why I wanted to join this podcast. I think that, and I don't have children, but I think that if you want to make a difference in our world, in the spirit of Governor Olene Walker, read to your child. Work with your child on counting. If your child can read at grade level at third grade, and if your child is competent in mathematics at third grade, they are more likely to graduate. So the advice I would have is if you're at the grocery store with your kid, count out the apples that you're putting into your bag. 1, 2, 3. Work on reading with them. If they read and if they can count by third grade, they're likely going to graduate and go into roles where they can make a difference in our community. And that's why Governor Olene Walker was such a champion for education. So that would be my advice.
Mine is very personal to now. And I actually was talking to Mike about this over our chips and salsa today. One is to breathe. I mean, it sounds so simple, but like I have found such relief and connection to myself and to other people through breath and pausing and expanding through breath, but also finding a lot of healing in that. And then the second part to that is befriending fear. And I'm working on is befriending my fears and accepting them as a part of me as opposed to something to push away. So that's what's been on my mind.
Thanks again to Naomi Watkins and Michael Aguilar for joining us on this episode of the podcast. All of the links that we mentioned in this conversation can be found with this episode's show notes on our podcast website at iamsaltlake.com. And to find this episode specifically, just type iamsaltlake.com/479.
Hey, we got an iTunes review here, Chrissy.
No way!
Yeah, finally.
Oh, okay, I have a confession. I didn't look at the notes before we recorded, so I am genuinely just like super excited and blown away.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Thanks, guy.
It's been a minute.
Or girl,
it's been a minute
them.
since because the last review we got on iTunes was like back in February.
Yeah,
so now it's
yeah.
April. I mean, that just seems like a long time to me, you know what I mean?
It does.
It's like, let's
I
go
wonder
here.
if it's not as many people listen to iTunes, but still,
Yeah,
much appreciated.
Go back, go leave us a review on Apple Podcast, iTunes, whatever your app that you're using says. I know they go off of Apple Podcast now, but this one is from Bub Popper. I'm pretty sure this is Jared Hooker, though. I'm pretty sure this is Jared Hooker based off of this review.
Hey, I'll take it.
So
Thanks.
I'm going to read it here. It says, "Hey, a great show that supports locals. 5 stars. It says, Chris and Chrissy were a joy to chat with on my episode. They are welcoming all types of people on their show, and they asked great questions. From all the episodes I have listened to and the one that I was on, they helped shed a positive light on any local SLC business, culinarian or artisan. Great show and great hosts."
Aw, he's such a great dude. If you guys haven't heard, we're going to guess this is Jared Hooker. If you haven't listened to his episode, it was the last one, and he is super cool and all about BBQ.
Yeah, so iamsaltlake.com/478. Go Jared Hooker. Go find out about this seasonings
His seasonings and spices.
He sent us a whole box of them, though.
Oh my gosh. And like, I'm trying to like sneak it into the kids' food, like pep it up a little bit. It's been so much fun.
We're gonna be doing some heavy barbecuing this summer, which we already
Heck
are.
Yeah, we are.
Hey, there's a few ways that you can support the podcast. First and foremost, you can tell your friends and family about us. You know, it doesn't cost you anything. Just mention us at the water cooler. Mention your favorite episode.
You know, over a family dinner. Great topic. Not as, debatable.
It does. So anyway, share us on social media or verbalize to your friends and family, or you can become a Patreon supporter. This is a great way to support the podcast. Really easy to do at patreon.com/IamSaltLake. All right, have a great week. Get out and enjoy the city. Support local. And we're going to see you next week on the next episode of I Am Salt Lake Podcast.
And good night, Grammy.